Let me tell you something, fellas, and I want you to really hear this, not just listen, because there is a difference. When women stop contacting a man, the very first thing that enters the room is silence. And silence is not nothing. Silence is not empty. Silence is full. It is full of meaning, full of decisions, full of thoughts that did get spoken out loud. Men don't usually understand silence right away because men are used to noise. Men are used to action, to movement, to things happening right in front of their eyes. Silence feels like nothing is happening, and that is why it's so dangerous, because everything has already happened by the time the silence arrives. See, as long as the phone keeps buzzing, as long as messages keep coming in, as long as there's checking in, asking questions, caring about details, a man assumes things are fine. No alarms go off. No warning lights flash. In a man's mind, communication equals stability. So if communication exists, there's no urgency to change anything. There's no reason to look deeper. There's no reason to self-evaluate. Everything feels secure. But what men don't realize is that silence does show up randomly. Silence does fall out of the sky. Silence is built slowly. It's constructed brick by brick, moment by moment, conversation by conversation that did go the way it should have. Silence is born from being patient too long, from explaining the same thing too many times, from hoping that effort will eventually be noticed. Silence is what happens when words stop feeling effective. And here is the part that hits hardest. By the time silence shows up on the outside, the decision has already been made on the inside. That quiet phone, that is not confusion. That is clarity. That is not hesitation. That is resolve. Men think silence is a pause. No, sir, silence is a conclusion. Because women don't just wake up one day and decide to stop contacting a man for no reason. That moment comes after countless internal conversations, after replaying situations late at night, after weighing effort against results, after asking, is this as good as it gets? Silence comes after patience runs out, not before. And men miss it because silence does argue. Silence does complain. Silence does demand attention. Silence just is. And because it is quiet, men underestimate it. Men think folly, some peace. But what they don't realize is that the peace they are feeling is not pieced together, it is piece apart. Silence is what happens when someone gets tired of carrying emotional weight alone. Silence is what happens when showing up starts to feel optional instead of appreciated. Silence is the final form of communication, and it speaks louder than any argument ever could. Let me tell you something else. When women stop contacting a man, it's not about drama. It's not about playing games. It's not about trying to provoke a reaction. Silence is not manipulation. Silence is protection. It's the moment when energy stops being poured into a place that no longer feels safe, valued, or reciprocal. Men often think silence means interest has faded slowly. No, interest did. Fades slowly. Interest fought. Interest waited. Interest hoped. Silence shows up when interest finally gives up trying to be heard, and that is why silence feels so sudden to men. It feels abrupt. It feels unexpected because men did hear the quiet warnings, the shorter replies, the reduced enthusiasm, the emotional pullback. Those were the early signs. Silence is just the final stage. Here's the truth. Silence does come from weakness. Silence comes from strength. It takes strength to stop reaching out. It takes strength to stop explaining. It takes strength to choose stillness over struggle. Men don't realize that communication stopping means emotional labor has already stopped too. There is no more trying to convince, no more trying to connect dots, no more hoping actions will match words. Silence means someone decided to save energy instead of wasting it. And when silence arrives, men often do the wrong thing internally. They relax. They assume control. They think the absence of messages means less responsibility. But silence is T absence. Silence is presence in another form. It is presence of clarity, presence of boundaries, presence of self-respect. The reason silence feels confusing is because it doesn't announce itself. There is no speech, no dramatic exit, just quiet. And that quiet forces men to sit with their own thoughts. It removes distraction. It removes validation. It removes the reassurance that someone is still there no matter what. And that it's uncomfortable because now there's no buffer, no one checking in, no one filling the gaps. Silence creates space, and space creates reflection. But at this stage, reflection is already late because silence means the emotional distance has already been established. It means expectations have been released. It means attachment has been loosened. Silence is the sound of someone stepping back without making a scene. And men often think silence is reversible. They think it's just a phase. But silence isn't a phase. Silence is a boundary. It's the line that says, I've said enough. What makes silence so powerful is that it does demand anything from the man. There's no pressure, no request, no ultimatum. And that is exactly why it works, because the responsibility shifts internally. Now, the man has to notice, the man has to think, the man has to feel the absence. Silence teaches lessons words could teach. Words can be ignored. Words can be dismissed. Silence cannot be argued with. And let me say this clearly, silence is not about punishment. It is about peace. It is about choosing calm over chaos. It is about stepping away from emotional exhaustion. By the time silence shows up, the emotional work has already been done. Tears have already been cried privately. Decisions have already been weighed. Acceptance has already begun. So when a man finally notices the silence, he's already behind the timeline. He's reacting to something that has been developing for a long time. That is why silence feels final, because it is. Silence is the moment when someone stops asking to be understood and starts understanding personally. It is the moment when energy turns inward instead of outward. It is the moment when self-worth takes priority over connection. Men underestimate silence because it does look dramatic. But silence is one of the strongest moves a person can make. It says, I know my value, and I no longer need to prove it. And that is the first thing that happens when women stop contacting a man. Silence enters the room. Not empty, not meaningless, but full of truth, full of decision, and full of closure. And once silence settles in, everything after that changes. Now let's talk about what happens next, because silence is only the beginning. After the quiet settles in, there is a shift. And this shift is subtle at first, almost invisible, but it is powerful. It is the kind of change you don't notice right away because it does make noise. Nothing crashes. Nothing explodes. Life keeps moving on the surface. Work still happens. Days still pass. But underneath all of that, something has moved out of alignment. When contact stops, energy changes direction. Before, energy was flowing outward. Messages were sent. Attention was given. Time was invested. Emotional effort was extended. But now the energy turns inward. And when energy turns inward, peace begins to form. Not the loud kind of peace that announces itself, but the quiet kind that settles into the body and mind. The kind that comes from no longer waiting for responses, no longer wondering how words will be received, no longer adjusting tone, timing, or emotions just to keep a connection alive. This is where men often misread the situation. From the outside, it looks calm. It looks like nothing is wrong. There are no complaints, no emotional conversations, no pressure. And a man might think, this is better. This is easier. But what feels easier for the man is actually detachment taking place. Because when contact stops, effort stops too. Effort is what keeps emotional bonds active. Without effort, bonds don't immediately break, but they loosen, they stretch, they weaken. And that process does hurt at first. In fact, it often feels like relief. That relief is dangerous because relief can feel like resolution, but it's not. It's separation in disguise. While peace is growing on one side, Confidence grows on the other. A man starts to feel secure in the wrong way. He assumes stability because there is no conflict. He assumes everything is under control because no one is asking for more. He tells himself that silence means acceptance, but silence does not mean acceptance. Silence means withdrawal. And here, as where time becomes a factor. At first, nothing seems different. A day passes, then another. The phone stays quiet, but it does not feel alarming yet. Habits haven't fully caught up to reality. The mind hasn't connected the dots, but slowly the absence starts to create space. And space is where thoughts lie. The routine changes. There's no check-in, no follow-up, no shared rhythm. And that is when the man starts to notice something feels off, even if he can't name it. It's not pain yet. It's discomfort, a low-level unease. A feeling that something familiar is missing even though nothing was officially taken away. That is when the shift begins to affect him, because now the things that were once background noise become noticeable by their absence. The messages that used to come in at certain times no longer arrive. The presence that used to be reliable is suddenly gone. And the mind does what it always does in silence. It starts replaying. Moments resurface. Conversations replay themselves. Times when effort was half given suddenly feel heavier. Things that were brushed off start to carry weight. The man begins to realize that consistency was doing more work than he ever acknowledged. This is the moment when value starts to show itself. Not when it was present, but when it's missing. Because consistency is quiet. It does demand applause. It does announce its importance. It just shows up. And when it stops showing up, the gap it leaves behind is unmistakable. Now the confidence begins to crack. Not all at once, but slowly. The man checks the phone more often. Wonders if something changed. Starts asking questions internally that were never asked before. Did I miss something? Was I too comfortable? Did I take that for granted? This is where reality starts sitting in. The shift isn't the emotional chaos. It is emotional clarity arriving too late. While peace continues to grow on one side, awareness grows on the other. And awareness hurts more than arguments ever did. Arguments at least gave the illusion that something was still being fought for. Silence removes that illusion, because silence does fight. Silence does chase. Silence does correct behavior. Silence simply steps back and allows truth to reveal itself. And the truth is this: when someone stops reaching out, it is because reaching out stopped feeling rewarding. Effort without return leads to exhaustion. And exhaustion leads to detachment. By the time the man starts to feel the loss, detachment has already done its work. That is why the shift feels unfair to him. It feels sudden. It feels unannounced. But in reality, the shift was gradual. It just wasn't visible. Men often say if something was wrong, why wasn't it said? But it was said, maybe not in the final moments, but in the earlier ones, in tone, in effort, in emotional availability. The signs were there, but they were quiet, and quiet signs are easy to miss when comfort takes over. As days go by, the absence becomes heavier. The man starts noticing emotional gaps. There is no one to share small wins with. No one to talk through frustrations with. No one to ground the day. And that's when loneliness creeps in, not because the man is alone, but because the connection he relied on is no longer active. This is where regret begins to form. Not dramatic regret, subtle regret, the kind that whispers instead of shouts, the kind that shows up late at night, the kind that makes a man think, I should have done more, even if he never said those words out loud before. And here, as the hard part, by the time regret shows up, peace has already settled in fully on the other side. The emotional storm has passed. The attachment has loosened. The need has dissolved. The shift has completed itself. That is why trying to reconnect at this stage feels different. The energy isn't the same. The responses, if they come at all, feel distant, polite, neutral. The emotional urgency is gone because the shift was about creating distance. It was about creating stability without reliance. When contact stops, independence grows, emotional self-sufficiency develops, and once someone learns to function without consistent contact, the need for it disappears. Men don't realize how powerful that is, because once someone stops needing reassurance, the dynamic changes permanently. There is no leverage left, no emotional dependency, just choice. And choice is a different kind of power. This is why the shift feels irreversible. Not because love disappears instantly, but because dependence does. And love without dependence does beg, chase, or tolerate imbalance. The shift teaches a lesson without words. It shows what happens when effort is and matched. It shows the cost of comfort. It shows the presence should never be assumed. And by the time the man fully understands the shift, the situation has already evolved beyond explanation. Because the shift was meant to be explained, it was meant to be experienced. Silence created the space. Space created reflection. Reflection created awareness, and awareness arrived too late to stop the change that had already taken root. That is what happens in the shift, not chaos, not drama, just a quiet, powerful realignment of energy that changes everything without saying a word. Let me leave you with this final truth, and I want this to sit deep, not just sound good, because this is where understanding turns into wisdom. This is where patterns either repeat or finally break. When everything has been said without words, when silence has settled, when the shift has already taken place and the lesson has already been delivered, what remains is choice. And choice is where character is revealed. Most men don't fail because they don't care. They fail because they assume care is understood without being demonstrated. They believe presence, once established, does need maintenance. They believe effort can be reduced once comfort is achieved. But life does stay reward assumption. Life responds to consistency. Silence exposes assumption. At this stage, there is no one left to convince, no one left to explain to, no emotional audience, just self and truth. And truth does argue. Truth simply stands there waiting to be acknowledged. This is the moment where many men try to rewrite the past in the mind. They replay moments and say, it was that bad, or I did enough, or there were good times. And yes, there were good times. But good times don't cancel out neglected times. Potential does erase patterns. Intentions don't outweigh impact. Silence does deny that good moments existed. Silence says good moments were not enough to sustain emotional safety. And that is the part that hurts. Because men like measurable effort, big gestures, clear actions. But emotional consistency is subtle. It's in follow through. It's in listening when there's nothing to gain. It is in showing up when it is inconvenient. It in noticing without being asked. When that kind of effort disappears or weakens, the connection does collapse immediately. It erodes slowly, quietly, until silence becomes the final expression of self-preservation. At this final stage, the temptation is to reach backward instead of moving forward, to chase what has already transformed, to demand answers that were already given in different forms. But chasing silence never restores balance. Silence cannot be pulled back by force. Silence only responds to growth, and growth is internal. This is where maturity separates itself from desperation. A desperate man tries to undo silence with words. A mature man understands silence is not asking for words, silence is demanding evolution. Evolution in awareness, evolution in emotional responsibility, evolution in presence. Because the truth is, silence did come to destroy a man. Silence came to shape one. It shapes patience. It shapes humility. It shapes self-reflection. It teaches that connection is not owned. It earned repeatedly every day through behavior, not promises. Men often say if silence had explained itself, things would be different. No, explanation was never the missing piece. Consistency was. Silence isn't confused. Silence is certain. By the time silence becomes permanent, expectations have been released. And that is why trying to return to old dynamics feels impossible. Expectations once held together with effort no longer supported. This is where accountability becomes freeing instead of heavy. Accountability does mean self-blame. It means self-awareness. It means recognizing where comfort replaced curiosity, where routine replaced intention, where presence became passive. And here's the hardest realization of all: silence did take anything away that was already slipping. That realization stings, but it also empowers. Because once a man understands this, he stops seeing silence as rejection and starts seeing it as redirection. Redirection toward growth, redirection toward emotional intelligence, redirection toward becoming someone who does need silence to teach the lesson again. The goal is to regret the past endlessly. The goal is to refine the future. This is where men rebuild, not by chasing what ended, but by becoming more grounded, more aware, more intentional in everything that follows. The lesson of silence carries forward into new connections, new conversations, new opportunities. And here, as the quiet victory most men don't notice at first, the man who truly learns from silence becomes calmer, more observant, less reactive, more present. He stops needing reminders. He starts noticing details. He values consistency because he understands the cost of losing it. That man no longer relies on comfort to guide behavior. That man relies on character. Silence teaches that love doesn't disappear because of one flaw. It fades because effort stops feeling mutual. Silence teaches that emotional presence is not optional if connection matters. Silence teaches that security is built daily, not assumed indefinitely. And once that lesson is integrated, something powerful happens. The man no longer fears silence because silence no longer controls growth. Silence already did its work. Instead of reacting emotionally, the man responds intentionally. Instead of chasing validation, the man builds value. Instead of needing reassurance, the man offers stability. This is where transformation happens. Not because silence ended something, but because silence clarified something. It clarified standards. It clarified boundaries. It clarified self-worth. And clarity is irreversible. That's why silence does usually reverse course. Not because hearts are cold, but because clarity is warm and steady. It does rush. It does panic. It does look back constantly. Clarity moves forward. So if silence entered a man as life and stayed, the worst thing to do is remain stuck in self-pity or anger. Those emotions waste a lesson. The best thing to do is to listen, not for words, but for meaning. Meaning says, show up earlier next time. Meaning says, listen deeper next time. Meaning says, appreciate before absence teaches appreciation. And if that meaning is understood, silence becomes one of the greatest teachers a man will ever encounter. Not gentle, not kind, but effective. Because silence removes illusion, it removes entitlement, it removes emotional shortcuts, and what remains is truth. Truth about effort, truth about presence, truth about growth. The man who accepts that truth does repeat the same cycle. He evolves beyond it. And that is the final outcome of silence, not loneliness, not loss, but awareness. Awareness that love must be maintained. Awareness that connection must be nurtured. Awareness that emotional safety is built through consistency, not convenience. Silence did come to ruin a man's life. Silence came to refine it. And once that refinement happens, the man no longer waits for silence to tell him something is wrong. He notices sooner, he responds earlier, he values deeper. That is the real ending, not reunion, not regret, but responsibility. And responsibility, once embraced, changes everything.